I built their media empire with them for 15 years. The day they fired me, I didn't cry. I just smiled because I knew what they didn't. I was the architect of the very system they were about to take public, and I also knew exactly how to make it crumble. They thought I was just another disposable employee. They had no idea that the software they were selling was running on foundations only I truly understood. My name is Marla Jensen, and for 15 years, I was the ghost in Glovix's machine. At 38, I'd spent my entire adult life in this glass tower overlooking Brighton Falls, watching this Midwest town transform from forgotten railroad stop to tech hub wannabe. When I started here, Glovix was 3 guys in a garage with a dream about revolutionizing digital media distribution. Now they were, a 400-employee operation preparing for the biggest IPO the region had ever seen. I remember my first day like it was yesterday. Fresh out of grad school, eager to change the world, walking into that garage that smelled of burnt coffee and ambition. Jake, Tommy, and Marcus, the founders, had hired me to build their product architecture from scratch. "We need someone who thinks in systems," Jake had said, his eyes bright with startup fever. "Someone who can see the whole forest while planting every single tree." And plant I did. Every algorithm, every user interface, every back-end system that made Glovix what it was today had my fingerprints on it. I coded through pregnancies I never had, through relationships that withered from neglect, through my mother's funeral because the product launch couldn't wait. I became the institutional memory, the one who knew why every decision was made, where every digital body was buried. The early days were intoxicating. We'd work 20-hour days fueled by energy drinks and the promise of equity. I built our content recommendation engine from scratch, writing elegant code that learned user preferences like a digital psychologist, the ad distribution system that would eventually generate 80% of our revenue. That was my baby, born during a 72-hour coding marathon that left me hospitalized from exhaustion. But success is a strange poison. As Glovix grew, the garage founders became boardroom sharks. Jake sold his shares and disappeared to Costa Rica. Tommy died in a skiing accident, or so they said. Marcus hung on as CTO. But he was a shell, more interested in his yacht than our codebase. The venture capitalists circled, smelling blood and money. The new executives arrived like locusts. First came the CFO, a Harvard boy who looked at our burn rate like a disappointing golf score. Then the CMO, all teeth and empty promises, who called our original vision quaint. But the death blow came with Carson Maddox, our new CEO, brought in specifically to shepherd the IPO. 32 years old, with the dead eyes of a management consultant and a smile that never reached them. "Legacy infrastructure," he'd say in meetings, looking directly at me. "Legacy thinking." I became a relic in my own kingdom. The new hires, bright young things with their Stanford degrees and signing bonuses, treated me like furniture. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. My emails went unanswered. My product proposals gathered dust while inferior ideas from Maddox's boys got fast-tracked. They moved my office 3 times in 6 months. From the corner suite I'd earned through sweat and genius, to a windowless box near the server room, and finally to an open desk among the junior developers. Each move was accompanied by an apologetic HR email about space optimization and collaborative environments. I knew what was coming. In this industry, when they start erasing you slowly, the final delete is inevitable. But I also knew something they didn't. You can't remove the foundation without understanding what holds up the house. And I was the only one who truly understood the elegant, intricate, irreplaceable code that made Glovix more than just another media platform. They saw an aging female engineer who'd peaked, a costly reminder of the company's scrappy past. What they didn't see was that I'd built myself into the system so deeply that removing me would be like performing surgery in the dark. The morning of my last Monday at Glovix, I wore my best suit. Not because I had any important meetings scheduled, but because sometimes you dress for the war you know is coming. As I walked through those glass doors for what would be the last time as an employee, I caught my reflection and smiled. They thought they were cutting fat. They were actually cutting their own throat. The strategic investor meeting had just ended. I'd presented our Q3 product roadmap to a room full of suits who typed more than they listened. My throat was dry from 90 minutes of explaining why our recommendation algorithm needed an overhaul before the IPO. Blank stares. Maddox had actually checked his phone while I was mid-sentence. I was refilling my coffee mug, already mentally preparing the follow-up documentation they'd never read. When Brittany from HR appeared at my elbow, 25 years old, with the kind of perkiness that came from never having built anything real. Marla, Carson would like to see you in conference room C. Conference room C, not his office. The termination room. We called it windowless, soundproof, with a box of tissues strategically placed on the table. I followed her, my heels clicking on the polished concrete floors I'd helped select back when this was still a warehouse. My coffee mug was steady in my hand. 15 years of muscle memory kept it level. Maddox sat at the head of the table, flanked by Brittany and our legal counsel, Robert something. A manila folder lay closed in front of him. He didn't stand when I entered. Marla, please sit. I sat, placed my mug carefully on the table. The Glovix logo faced me, that stylized G I'd helped design in Photoshop a lifetime ago. I'll keep this brief, Maddox said, his fingers drumming once on the folder. We're restructuring the product organization. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. The words hung in the recycled air. I waited for more. Surely there would be more. An explanation. A thank you. Something. We appreciate your contributions, he continued, reading now from what was clearly a script. But we need fresh perspectives as we move toward our public offering. The industry is evolving rapidly, and we need leadership that can adapt to these changes. Fresh perspectives. I'd built systems that processed 50 million user interactions daily, and he was talking about fresh perspectives. I see, I said. My voice was remarkably steady. And my team. They'll report to Brad moving forward. Brad, who'd been with the company 8 months and still couldn't explain how our core algorithm worked. Robert slid a document across the table. This is your separation agreement, standard package, 3-month severance, continued health insurance through Cobra. You'll need to sign the non-disclosure and non-compete clauses. I didn't touch the paper. When? I'm sorry? Maddox's brow furrowed slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him. When do I need to leave? Oh. Brittany jumped in, eager to be useful. We've already disabled your access badges and accounts. Security will escort you to your desk to collect any personal items. You have 30 minutes. 30 minutes to pack up 15 years. I almost laughed. I'll need to transition my projects. I said. The recommendation engine update alone requires. Brad has it covered. Maddox was already checking his phone again. We've been preparing for this transition. Preparing, while I was presenting to investors, they'd been sharpening the knife. I stood, leaving the separation agreement untouched. I'll need boxes. Security will provide them, Brittany chirped. The walk to my desk felt both endless and too quick. Jerry from security, who I'd shared hundreds of late-night pizzas with, couldn't meet my eyes as he handed me 2 cardboard boxes. My former coworkers, suddenly found their screens fascinating. I packed mechanically, a photo of my sister. The original Glovix business plan, handwritten on napkins. A stress ball shaped like a brain. Not much to show for 15 years. Most of my life here existed in code, in systems, in the digital architecture that powered everything. 5 minutes, Jerry said softly. I pulled out my personal laptop, the one I'd used for after-hours coding. Technically personal property, though it contained backups of everything I'd ever worked on. Jerry didn't question it. Why would he? I'd been here longer than the security protocols. No goodbye emails, no farewell speech. I walked out through the same doors I'd helped install, past the reception desk I'd helped design, into a parking lot where my car sat in the same spot I'd claimed since before we even had assigned parking. I sat in my car for a long moment, engine off, watching the building that had been my second home. Through the windows, I could see people moving, working, living the life I'd just been erased from. The IPO banners were already going up, purple and gold, promising a bright future for Glovix. I turned the key, drove away. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. At home, I set the boxes on my kitchen counter and opened my laptop. The familiar glow of the screen felt like coming home. I navigated to a hidden partition, entered a 32-character password, and smiled at what appeared. Every line of code, every system diagram, every backdoor I'd built for testing and forgotten to document. They thought they'd fired me. But you can't fire someone who's already woven into the DNA of your company. You can only make them angry. The first week, I did nothing. I woke at my usual 5:30 a.m., made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table, watching the sunrise paint Brighton Falls in shades of amber. No emails to check, no fires to put out, no meetings to prepare for, just silence and caffeine and the strange weight of freedom. I walked. Miles and miles through neighborhoods I'd only seen through office windows. The town was different at 10 in the morning, full of retirees and stay-at-home parents and people who lived lives unshackled from sprint cycles and deployment schedules. I bought books I'd been meaning to read for years. Literary fiction that had nothing to do with optimization or user engagement. But at night, I couldn't help myself. I'd open my laptop and dive back into my private repository. 15 years of code sprawled before me like a map of my own mind. Every function, every method, every clever hack I'd implemented to keep Glovix running smoothly. It was all there, waiting. The architecture was more complex than even I'd remembered. Layers upon layers of interconnected systems, each depending on the others in ways that weren't always obvious. The recommendation engine pulled data from 17 different sources. The ad distribution system made 40,000 micro-decisions per second, and underneath it all, like a nervous system, ran the diagnostic framework I'd built in the early days. That's when I found it. A testing portal I'd created 6 years ago during a particularly nasty bug hunt. I'd needed a way to inject synthetic data into the live system to trace an intermittent failure. The portal was still there, buried in a configuration file no one else would think to examine. Still active, still accepting my authentication tokens. It wasn't a backdoor in the malicious sense. Everything I'd built was legitimate, documented somewhere in the labyrinth of their technical specifications. But documentation was like archaeology at Glovix, layers of sediment burying the important bits. And with me gone, who would even know where to dig? I closed the laptop, opened it again, closed it. The next morning, I saw the news. Glovix had filed their S1. The IPO was official. Target valuation, $500 million. The tech press was fawning. The future of digital media. One headline proclaimed. Maddox's smug face stared out from the article photo, standing in front of my architecture diagram like he'd drawn it himself. That's when the anger crystallized into something harder, colder, more useful. I spent the next 3 weeks studying, not coding, studying. I read every document about IPO failures, analyzed what made tech stocks tumble, learned about perception and timing and the delicate psychology of public offerings. The market, I realized, was just another system. And systems could be understood, manipulated, optimized for different outcomes. I also studied Glovix's current state. They'd gone on a hiring spree, bringing in what they called top talent to replace not just me, but 3 other long-timers who'd been pushed out. Their LinkedIn updates were breathless with excitement. Their GitHub commits showed frantic activity. Brad was pushing code at a rate that suggested panic rather than progress. Poor Brad. He was trying to optimize the recommendation engine without understanding its foundation, like trying to tune a piano while wearing oven mitts. His changes were making things worse, not better. The system was compensating for now, falling back on my fail-safes, but those wouldn't hold forever. I created a new email account. Sarah Chen, generic enough to be anyone, started lurking in the investor forums where retail traders dissected every morsel of Glovix news. The enthusiasm was infectious. Revolutionary technology. Disruptive potential. First mover advantage. All the buzzwords that made money flow like water. They had no idea they were betting on a house of cards where the architect had been fired and the new contractors couldn't read the blueprints. One evening, I pulled up the diagnostic portal again. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. It would be so easy. A few lines of code to increase latency, a small adjustment to the content weighting. Nothing that would trigger immediate alarms, but enough to start a cascade of small failures. No, too direct, too traceable, potentially, and more importantly, too merciful. They wanted fresh perspectives. They wanted to evolve rapidly. Fine. Let them evolve without understanding what they were evolving from. Let Brad optimize himself into chaos. Let Maddox explain to investors why their revolutionary technology was suddenly behaving like a drunk GPS. But I could help that process along, accelerate it, all perfectly legally, using nothing but the tools and access I'd legitimately built into the system years ago. Testing functions that were still running, still logging, still quietly accepting commands from authentication tokens that IT should have revoked but hadn't because they didn't know they existed. I made a list. Not of vulnerabilities, I wasn't going to break anything. Instead, I listed every hidden complexity in the system, every place where my elegant code had papered over fundamental flaws in the business logic, every shortcut that worked only because I was there to maintain it. Then I made another list. Journalists who covered tech failures, short sellers who specialized in overvalued IPOs, former employees who might have their own stories to tell. The game was about to begin. And unlike Glovix's executive team, I actually understood the rules. That night, I slept better than I had in years. No anxiety dreams about server crashes or missed deadlines, just peaceful darkness and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't about what you do. It's about what you stop doing, and what you let others discover when you're no longer there to save them from themselves. The IPO roadshow was a masterpiece of corporate theater. Maddox appeared on CNBC, Bloomberg, TechCrunch, anywhere that would give him airtime. His talking points were polished. Revolutionary engagement algorithms, unprecedented user retention, the Netflix of digital publishing. Every interview ended with that practiced smile and the magic number, $500 million initial valuation. I watched it all from my living room, sometimes with wine, sometimes with popcorn. The irony was delicious. They were selling my code, my algorithms, my architecture as their innovation. The recommendation engine Brad was supposedly enhancing was running on logic I'd written during a weekend hackathon in 2018. The investor forums were electric. Reddit's r Wall Street Bets was salivating. GLVX to the moon, they chanted, complete with rocket emojis. The pre-IPO hype was everything Maddox had dreamed of. Purple and gold Glovix banners appeared on every tech blog. Sponsored content flooded LinkedIn. They even bought a Times Square billboard. That's when I reached out to Lydia Shaw. I'd known Lydia since she was a junior reporter covering the Brighton Falls tech scene. Now she wrote for Protocol, specializing in deep dives into tech companies' hidden problems. Her exposé on algorithmic bias at a major social media platform had won a Polk Award. More importantly, she hated corporate bullshit as much as I did. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, far from Glovix's sphere of influence. Lydia looked the same, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, recorder app already running on her phone. Marla Jensen, she said, stirring her cortado. I heard you left Glovix. 15 years is a long time. They preferred to call it restructuring, I said. Her eyebrow raised. Right before the IPO. Fresh perspectives, I quoted. The industry is evolving rapidly. Bullshit, she said flatly. So what's the real story? I slid a folder across the table. Not stolen documents, I wasn't that stupid. Just publicly available information arranged in a particular way. User complaints buried in support forums. Inconsistencies in their reported engagement metrics. Screenshots of ads being served to wildly inappropriate content categories. Their algorithm has a bias problem, I said carefully. The recommendation engine weights certain content types in ways that could be problematic, especially for advertisers who care about brand safety. Lydia flipped through the pages, her expression sharpening. This is showing ads for children's toys next to conspiracy theory content. The algorithm optimizes for engagement, I explained. Extreme content gets clicks. The system doesn't understand context, just correlation. It's a fundamental flaw in the architecture. Can they fix it? I thought of Brad, probably pulling his third all-nighter this week, making changes he didn't understand to code he couldn't fully read. Theoretically, yes. Realistically, not without someone who understands the original implementation. And that would be you. Was me, I corrected. They have fresh perspectives now. Lydia studied me. You're not asking me to publish stolen data. Everything I'm showing you is public. User forums, support tickets, social media complaints. It's all there if someone knew where to look. I'm just providing context. Yo, Ari, and why should I trust your context? Because in 2 weeks, when they hit the public market, retirement funds and retail investors are going to pour money into a company that's one algorithm tweak away from a brand safety crisis. The testing data shows it clearly. The system is becoming increasingly unstable. But they've hidden those tests in their S1 filing under standard operational risks. She closed the folder. I'll need to verify this independently. Of course. Talk to Rachel Martinez. She left Glovix last year. David Park from the data science team. Jennifer Huang from QA. They all saw the problems developing. You've done your homework. I had 15 years to take notes. Lydia pocketed her recorder. If this checks out, when would you want it published? That's your call. I'm just a concerned former employee who thinks investors deserve transparency. She laughed. Right. And this has nothing to do with them firing you weeks before the IPO that would have made your equity worth millions. My equity vested years ago, I said truthfully. I cashed out most of it already. This isn't about money. What's it about then? I thought of Maddox's dismissive smile, of Brittany's perky efficiency, of 30 minutes to pack up 15 years. Accountability, I said. Lydia stood to leave, then paused. You know this will tank their valuation if I publish it. Only if it's true, I said. And only if their fresh perspectives can't fix it in time. She gave me a long look. You're playing a dangerous game, Marla. No, I said, finishing my coffee. They're playing a dangerous game. They just don't know it yet. 2 days later, I watched Brad's GitHub commits with professional interest. He was refactoring the core recommendation module, trying to optimize something he didn't fully understand. Every change created new edge cases. Every fix introduced subtle bugs that wouldn't manifest immediately, but would compound over time. He was doing exactly what I'd expected, applying modern solutions to legacy problems without understanding why the legacy code existed in the first place. Some of those inefficiencies he was removing were actually safeguards. Some of that redundant code was handling edge cases that occurred once in 10 million transactions, but could cascade into system-wide failures. The investor forums were hitting peak euphoria. Pre-IPO price estimates kept climbing. Glovix was going to be the success story of the year, the future of media, the next unicorn. I opened my laptop and navigated to the diagnostic portal. Still there? Still active? Still quietly logging every system metric, every error, every warning that Brad's changes were generating. I didn't touch anything. Didn't need to. The system was already beginning to eat itself. All I had to do was wait. The diagnostic portal became my evening entertainment. I'd pour a glass of wine, curl up on my couch, and watch the cascade of warnings bloom across my screen like digital fireworks. Brad's optimizations were having exactly the effect I'd predicted. Surface-level improvements masking deeper instabilities. Error rate up 0.3%. Response time degrading in edge cases. Memory leaks in the ad-serving module. Small things, invisible to anyone not looking at the whole system. but I was looking, and I could see the cracks forming. That's when I decided to help things along. Not sabotage, never sabotage, just selective maintenance withdrawal. The content filtering subsystem had always been finicky. I'd built in a manual calibration routine that ran every 72 hours, a little bit of code that adjusted weights based on emerging patterns. It wasn't documented because it had become second nature to me. Like breathing, the system could run without it, technically. But without those minor adjustments, the algorithm would start to drift. I logged into the diagnostic portal and disabled the automated calibration. One line of code commented out. The kind of thing that happens all the time in testing and sometimes gets forgotten. Plausible deniability wrapped in administrative oversight. The effects weren't immediate. That was the beauty of it. For the first week, nothing changed. Brad probably thought his optimizations were working perfectly. The metrics looked good. The investors were happy. The IPO date was set. March 15th, just 2 weeks away. Then the drift began. It started small. The recommendation engine began surfacing increasingly polarizing content. Not enough to trigger alarms, but sufficient to change user behavior patterns. Engagement metrics went up. Extreme content always drives engagement, but the quality of that engagement shifted. Users were staying on the platform, but they were angry. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Brand-safe advertisers started to notice their products appearing next to questionable content. I watched it all through the diagnostic portal, a ghost in their machine, invisible and omnipresent. Lydia's article dropped on a Tuesday morning, 1 week before the IPO. The headline was surgical. Inside Glovix's algorithm problem. Former employees warn of systemic bias and brand safety risks. She'd done her homework. Interviews with 5 former employees. Screenshots of inappropriate ad placements. Data showing the drift in content recommendations over the past month. Technical analysis from independent experts confirming the architectural flaws. It was journalism at its finest, meticulously sourced, technically accurate, devastating. The investor forums exploded. The Wall Street Bets crowd turned on a dime. Rocket emojis replaced by dumpster fires. GLVX is toast became the new refrain. Pre-IPO excitement curdled into suspicion. Maddox went on damage control immediately. An emergency all-hands meeting was called. I still had friends inside who texted me updates. Brad was reportedly working around the clock to address the concerns. The PR team was in crisis mode. Legal was reviewing everything. But the beautiful thing about complex systems is that panic makes them worse. Every rushed fix Brad implemented created new problems. The ad-serving module started showing latency spikes. The recommendation engine began producing inconsistent results. User complaints flooded in. That's when I played my final card. I'd been monitoring the system's error logs, watching the patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. At 2:47 a.m. Pacific time, 3 days before the IPO, the system hit a perfect storm of cascading failures. Brad's latest optimization conflicted with a legacy caching routine. The ad server started recycling old data. The recommendation engine went into a feedback loop. The result? For 6 hours, Glovix's platform began exclusively recommending and monetizing extreme political content, conspiracy theories, and divisive material. Every user, regardless of their preferences, got served the same toxic brew. Ads for major brands appeared next to the worst content imaginable. I didn't cause it. I want to be clear about that. I simply hadn't prevented it. The automated routines I'd built to catch these edge cases were disabled. The manual interventions I'd performed daily for 15 years weren't there. The system was running exactly as Brad had optimized it to run, without the invisible safety nets I'd maintained. By morning, screenshots were everywhere. Twitter was on fire. Major advertisers were pulling out. The IPO was in jeopardy. I watched Maddox's emergency press conference from my kitchen, coffee in hand. He looked haggard, his practiced smile nowhere to be seen. "We've identified the issue and are implementing fixes," he said, reading from a prepared statement. This was an isolated incident caused by a configuration error. We remain committed to our IPO timeline and to providing a safe, engaging platform for all users. Configuration error. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We know it was you. I deleted it and went for my morning walk. The spring air in Brighton Falls was crisp, full of promise. The town was waking up, oblivious to the corporate drama playing out in the glass tower on the edge of town. They couldn't prove anything. Every action I'd taken was within my legitimate access. Every change was plausible. Every failure was a natural consequence of their own decisions. I'd simply stopped preventing the inevitable. The diagnostic portal showed the system slowly stabilizing as Brad's team worked frantically to implement the fixes I'd been doing invisibly for years. They'd figure it out eventually. Maybe, but not in 3 days. Not in time for their precious IPO. I thought about responding to that text, about offering to come back as a consultant, to fix what they'd broken, for a price that would make their eyes water. But no, that wasn't the point. The point was simpler. You can't remove the foundation and expect the house to stand. They'd learn that lesson soon enough, at a valuation considerably lower than $500 million. March 15th, IPO day. I woke at 4 a.m., not from anxiety, but from anticipation. The markets would open in 5.5 hours, and Glovix would finally face its moment of truth. I made coffee and settled into my home office. 3 monitors glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. One showed CNBC's pre-market coverage. Another displayed the investor forums, already buzzing with speculation. The third held my diagnostic portal, still faithfully recording every hiccup in Glovix's struggling system. The opening bell rang at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. Glovix launched at $22 per share, already down from their initial target of $28. Within minutes, it dropped to $20. Then, $18. The ticker looked like a heart monitor flatlining. On CNBC, Maddox stood at the New York Stock Exchange, trying to maintain composure as the numbers behind him painted a different story than his words. "We're confident in our long-term trajectory," he said, sweat visible on his forehead despite the morning chill. Technical challenges are part of any growing platform. The interviewer wasn't buying it. "Your recommendation algorithm showed extreme content to millions of users just days ago. Major advertisers have paused campaigns. How do you restore trust?" "We've brought in top expertise to address these isolated incidents," Maddox replied. "Our team is working around the clock." The stock hit $15. My phone rang. Unknown number. But I recognized the area code. Glovix headquarters. "Hello?" "Marla." It was Marcus, the last remaining founder, his voice hollow. "We need you." "I'm sorry. Who is this?" "Don't play games. The whole system is failing. Brad's in the hospital. Exhaustion. The board is in full panic. We've lost $200 million in market cap in 30 minutes. I watched the ticker drop to $14. That sounds like a fresh perspective kind of problem. "Marla, please, I know what we did was wrong, but there are 400 employees here who are watching their equity disappear. People who had nothing to do with firing you." He was right about that. The admins, the sales team, the junior developers who'd looked up to me. They didn't deserve this. But then again, they'd all watched me pack my desk in silence. "My consulting rate is $5,000 an hour," I said. "Minimum 40-hour commitment. Paid in advance." Silence. Then, "Done." And I want it in writing that Carson Maddox personally requested my return. "Marla, those are my terms." The line went dead. The stock touched $13.50. I didn't move, didn't check email, just watched the numbers fall and waited. At $13, my phone rang again. "We accept your terms," Marcus said. "Maddox will sign whatever you want. Just please." "I'll be there in an hour." I closed the diagnostic portal, cleared my browser history, and shut down my systems. Then I dressed carefully, not in my termination day suit, but in jeans and the ancient Glovix hoodie from our first product launch. the one that said, "Building the Future," in faded letters. The drive to Glovix felt different this time. I wasn't rushing to fix someone else's emergency. I was arriving as the solution to a problem they'd created by discarding me. The parking lot was chaos. News vans everywhere, employees standing in clusters, checking their phones, watching their dreams evaporate. Security waved me through without checking. They all knew who I was. The elevator ride to the executive floor was surreal. 3 weeks ago, I'd been escorted out like a criminal. Now they were begging for my return. The boardroom was a war zone. Laptops everywhere, coffee cups overflowing. The smell of desperation thick in the air. Maddox sat at the head of the table. His power suit wrinkled, his executive presence shattered. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Relief, hatred, fear, all at once. "Marla," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming." I didn't sit. "Where's my contract?" Legal pushed papers across the table. I read every line, made them add a clause about public acknowledgement of my role in stabilizing the platform, then signed. $200,000 for 40 hours of work. Plus the satisfaction of watching Maddox sign his name below mine, his hand trembling slightly. "Now," I said, finally taking a seat. "Show me what Brad did." The next 6 hours were a blur of code reviews, system diagnostics, and surgical fixes. I re-enabled the calibration routines, patched the feedback loops, stabilized the ad server. It was like conducting an orchestra I'd written every note for, complex but familiar, chaotic but mine. By market close, the bleeding had stopped. Glovix ended the day at $14.20, down 35% from its opening. A $350 million valuation instead of $500 million, $14 million in market cap, evaporated. I stood to leave as the sunset painted the conference room golden. "The system is stable," I announced. "My full report will be ready tomorrow. I'll need access to continue monitoring for the next week." "Of course," Maddox said quickly. "Anything you need." I paused at the door. "Oh, and Carson? You'll want to hire back the other engineers you let go. Rachel Martinez, David Park, Jennifer Huang. They understand the legacy systems. Brad doesn't." He nodded mutely. The great disruptor, disrupted. As I walked back through the office, past the developers who'd ignored my termination, past the executives who'd endorsed it, I felt no triumph, no joy, just a cold satisfaction. They'd wanted to erase me. Instead, they'd proven I was invaluable. The stock price would recover eventually. The platform would stabilize. But everyone would remember the day Glovix nearly collapsed because they'd fired the person who actually understood how it worked. $14 million. The exact amount my equity would have been worth at their target valuation. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's demonstration. Of exactly what you were worth. 6 months later. I stood on the Tillicum Crossing Bridge in Portland, watching the Willamette River flow beneath my feet. The morning sun cast golden ripples across the water. And for the first time in years, I had nowhere urgent to be. The consulting contract with Glovix had ended after 3 weeks. I'd stabilized their systems, documented everything Brad had broken, and trained the returning engineers they'd rehired at premium salaries. The board had offered me the CTO position, twice my old salary, equity refresh, corner office. I declined without hesitation. Instead, I'd taken my consulting fees and a few strategic introductions from former colleagues and started something new. Not another platform or product, something smaller, cleaner. A boutique consultancy specializing in technical audits for investors. It turns out there were plenty of funds eager to pay someone who could look at a startup's code and tell them if the empire was built on sand. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel Martinez, now Glovix's VP of Engineering. "Stock hit $19 today, still climbing." I smiled and deleted the message. Glovix's recovery wasn't my concern anymore. They'd learned their lesson about disposable employees. Maddox had been quietly pushed out 3 months after the IPO disaster, replaced by someone who actually understood that technology companies were built on people. not PowerPoints. The tech press had dubbed it the Glovex collapse, a cautionary tale about hubris and technical debt. My name appeared in every article. The architect who'd been fired and then paid a fortune to return. Some called me a hero, others, a villain. I found I didn't care about either label. A jogger passed, and I stepped aside, my hand trailing along the bridge's cable stays. The engineering of it appealed to me. Honest steel and concrete, every stress point visible, nothing hidden. Unlike software, where the most critical supports were often invisible until they failed. My new company was small by design. 3 employees, select clients, interesting problems. We'd already prevented 2 catastrophic acquisitions by revealing the toxic codebases lurking beneath shiny demos. It wasn't empire building, but it was honest work. And I slept soundly every night. I thought about Marla from a year ago, killing herself to maintain systems for people who saw her as furniture. That woman felt like a stranger now. She'd believed that dedication would be rewarded, that being indispensable meant being valued. Hard lessons learned. The sun climbed higher, warming my face. I had a client meeting at noon, a deep dive into a fintech startup's authentication system. But for now, I just stood on the bridge, watching the water flow, feeling the solid structure beneath my feet. My phone rang. Unknown number, 650 area code, Silicon Valley. Another startup in trouble. Probably. Another founder who just discovered their genius developer had built a house of cards. Another board wondering why their revolutionary platform was held together with digital duct tape. I let it go to voicemail. They could wait. The desperate ones always called back. And if they wanted my help, well, my rates had gone up. $6,000 an hour now. The price of hard-won expertise and the luxury of choosing who deserved it. I turned from the river and walked back toward downtown, my shadow stretching long behind me. Somewhere in Brighton Falls, Glovex's towers caught the morning light, still standing, still functioning. I'd built them strong enough to survive their own stupidity. That had to count for something. But I'd also learned that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't bringing down the tower. It's walking away from it, intact and unbowed. While they scramble to hold up the ceiling, you're no longer there to support. 15 years I'd given them. In the end, it took just $14 million and one catastrophic day to prove what I'd been worth all along. They thought I was just a part of their machine, a cog they could replace with someone younger, cheaper, more compliant. But I wasn't a cog. I was the engineer who built the machine. And now? Now I was free. The morning stretched ahead, full of possibility. No emergencies to fix. No code to debug. No executives to appease. Just the sun on the water and the solid ground beneath my feet. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing that somewhere, in conference rooms and board meetings, my name still made people nervous. They say success is the best revenge. They're wrong. The best revenge is becoming someone who no longer needs it. Thank you so much for listening to this story of ultimate workplace revenge. Where are you listening from? I'd love to hear in the comments below and connect with fellow listeners around the world. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about workplace justice and standing up for your worth. Have you ever experienced something similar? Let's discuss in the comments.